Большое спасибо вам за то, что вы пришли к нам сегодня. У нас сегодня секция называется «Сетевые многопользовательские компьютерные игры. Неконтролируемая площадка ксенофобских настроений среди молодежи». Или нет? Я хотела бы представиться сама.
I would like to introduce myself and our participants. My name is Alisa Chumachenko, and I have been working in the area of games for 20 years. I founded several rather large companies. One of them is called Game Inside. It's a mobile developer, and currently I'm the founder and the general director of SBERgames, part of the SBER system, and we're also continuing to publish and develop games. During the last 5 years, I have been working on data in games. We have studied a large amount of data related to players, and today I will tell you about a number of interesting data. And our speakers are over there. Andrew Oboler, CEO at the Online Hate Prevention Institute, Vice President of the IEEE Computer Society.
Или вы хотите сами представиться?
Would you like to introduce yourself? Or shall I say so?
I'm very pleased to be here. I'm visiting you from Australia. It is my first time in Russia, and this has been a very amazing conference so far. My main work, I run a charity in Australia dealing with all forms of online hate. I also serve, as was mentioned, as Vice President of the IEEE Computer Society. This is the largest technical body for computing professionals in the world. We have hundreds of thousands of members and local chapters, including here in Russia. I'm also involved with IRA. We had in some other sessions before. I serve on the Australian government's delegation for this, and with the American Jewish Congress. I serve as an advisor to them and a number of other roles. My background is in computer science and also in law, and this is how I've come to this field. So, thank you. And back to you.
Извините.
My apologies. Artemy Kozlov, tell us about yourself, please. Greetings, my name is Artemy. As long as I remember myself, for the last 15 years or more, I have been writing and telling about video games. And during the last 5 games or so, I have been creating game communities at Pixonic Company. And in brief, that's it.
И с нами еще Nikolai.
And also with us is Nikolai Kostin, who introduces himself as a Dota player. Greetings, my name is Nikolai. The interesting thing for the current process is that I play Dota. I have been playing Dota for more than 5 years, and I have more than 2,500 hours. So you can imagine how much I play in years or months. Apart from this, I work with Jewish youth. I work at Hillel, at the Jewish Fund, and I'm also a student of the Modern Judaism Institute. Also, Amber Weinber should be with us, who is the WGC Intel Unit Manager from Austria. Online, Amber, greetings. Amber, hello.
Hi, I hope you can hear me well. My name is Amber Weinber. I work with the World Jewish Congress. We're an international body on representing Jewish communities across the world. And I focus on I'm the Intel Manager, and we focus on a lot of research related to anti-Semitism, Holocaust denial, online hate, and we work with several platforms as well. So I'm happy to be here today.
Welcome. Добро пожаловать. Давайте начнем.
Welcome, so let us begin.
Как я уже сказала,
As I already said, for 20 years I have been working with games, and during the last 5 years I have been working with data in games. And I've had a unique opportunity, as we have very much data, and we can get this data from some online games. We picked up the text messages in Dota chats. It should be said that they are not the main channel for communication. The main communication is voice, but also the players also communicate by text if they don't have a microphone or they don't want to use it for some reason. So that's quite a good sample. And we analyzed these text messages from the point of view of xenophobia, racism, toxicity, etc., to see how it works. The statistics is as follows. First of all, among all messages, 18% of the messages contain some kind of toxic stuff, some kind of unpleasantry. It can seem a lot if we don't take into account the fact that Dota, as many other games, is a competitive game. And in the competition conditions, this stimulates emotions. And very often, the negative feelings in the games come from the fact that the players express their emotions. Statistically, there are more negative messages from players who lose. Like in real life, you lose, you get unhappy, you start getting mad at everybody else. However strange it may sound, among the Russian-speaking players, manifestations of racism are very rare. We also surveyed some players, and according to our data, according to the survey, we see that racism is encountered when, for example, there's a mention of national identity or the country in a nickname. If I write that my nickname is a Russian cyber sausage, then at a time of an emotional situation, people may start writing unpleasant words about Russia at me. Russia, Ukraine, and all the political issues in the real world are also portrayed as in a mirror, are reflected. In the English-speaking segment, there is more racism. We see we see a much higher percentage ratio compared to the Russian segment. I have an explanation. I'm not sure I'm right with it, but it may be true that in Russian there is a lot of bad language, of obscene message. So when we need to give way to our emotions, we use obscene language. While in English there are fewer obscene language, fewer bad words. So they express their emotions as is common in their social area, which includes racism. In fact, attacking the national identity among the messages is only 0.3%. More often, people are just being rude to each other. There are rude words, threats, but much fewer attacks towards the identity. What else I would like to add? Or maybe to sum up. The games per se do not in any way stimulate manifestations of racism, xenophobia, toxicity. They are only, in particular because many of the games are a competitive process, they are online games, are an opportunity to express their negative emotions. Among children, kids and young people, there's much more toxicity than among adults. If you play online games with an adult person, there is much lower chance to hear rude words towards yourself. This is due to the internet. When the kids get there, everything is available. And there's wonderful statistics which I was very much surprised about. And we think that the most hardcore, most difficult and most toxic type of games is massive online background area, MOBA. And there are two games which are very popular, Dota 2 and League of Legends. And we shall be talking a lot about them because the presentations are related to these games. But I have the statistics. I was sure that the most toxic game is Dota. But in fact, the most toxic games are sports games. However strange it might sound. In sports games, there is 17 to 19%, like the FIFA game or the Madden. In the racing games, Need for Speed or Gran Turismo, 17%. And you will be surprised that in sandbox games, which everybody knows as Minecraft, 16%, while the games that we thought would be the most toxic ones, 11 to 12%. So, children, sandbox, and they feel that they have that everything is allowed to them. And now I want to pass on the word to Nikolai Kozlov. Oh, I'm sorry, Nikolai Kostin, who will tell us about his experience. Thank you very much. So my experience of playing Dota. What I would like to begin with, in order to understand where toxic communication comes from in Dota, we need to understand the process of the work. It's a battle arena where battles take place between two teams. And in Dota, there are about 121 persons, and for each of these guys you need to know how to play. So if the player cannot become good enough for this character he is impersonating, there's a lot of criticism. First of all, the character gets criticized, and it is considered that it is done on purpose, that they let down their own team, and the other team usually is happy about that. Now, and the colleagues analyzed chats. It should be said that most of the communication takes place in the voice chat, because it's much easier and much faster to press a button and say something, and thus convey the information. Now let's have a mental experiment. Let's imagine that all the team gets together in one place in the map, and there is a team, there is a battle with the other team. So everybody tries to pass on information. They switch on the voice chat simultaneously. And as they do it all together, everybody starts shouting. And according to my impression, when a person shouts, especially using obscene language, to shorten down what they're saying, that's not where the conflict is, but the feeling of a conflict, the perception of a conflict. And then there is certain devaluation of what is being said, and there are some possible things, or depreciation. I feel more calm about some negative feedback, about people being rude. It can be rare, but anything can happen in the internet, anything can happen in real life, and it's like a practice. It's helps us not take close to heart what happens. It's like a simulator. There's no point getting mad at a simulator. You cannot compete with a simulator. You just need to learn how to use it. That is why I think it helps well. Another thing I would like to tell you about are sites which are near the games. There's a special platform called Discord, which is kind of like Skype or Messenger for communication. It was invented for gamers. And there is the option of creating servers and rooms inside these servers to communicate. And people communicate not only in the course of the game, but before the game with their own team, with the others, and afterwards they discuss games in Discord. There are also rooms where people play the guitar and sing songs, or communicate or read poetry to each other. They can discuss some news or problems. At the same time, there are rooms which I mentioned toxic, where people go to have a toxic communication intentionally. And the purpose of this is to debate or competition is to compete in their flowery speech. The difference is only that they use obscene language and they just try to overtalk your interlocutor. It's an interesting issue. You can like it or dislike it, but it exists. As for xenophobia, what I wanted to say, according to my observations, xenophobia in the Russian-speaking segment is very little or non-existent. Anti-Semitism does not exist. I carried out the experiment before our study, and I played with different nicknames and different avatars related to Jewish. So I was a Jewish princess, I put Moses on my avatar, and intentionally made mistakes in the game, or non-intentionally, in order to provoke their partners. So even if I got any hate, it was directly related to my to some issues in the game. Nobody paid attention to my nickname. Some reason, and in fact, it's a good news. Nobody cared much about my nationality. Another important thing I would like to mention is that, in fact, in the game, in the process of the game, few people look at the nicknames of your partners. Everybody calls each other in the chat by the names of their characters, because it's not possible. It's easy to remember 121 names of the characters than looking up the names of the people you play with. I believe that's enough right now, and we shall have an opportunity to discuss it later on, so thank you for your attention. Thank you very much. I would like to say a couple of words about professional competitions, because also Dota 2 is a cyber sport discipline, and I have a story about situations that happened in during professional teams due to Russian. For example, recently a Filipino player, Cuckoo, was fined publicly for calling the partners, Chinese partners in Russian game. And another championship, the largest championship in Dota, which was won by a Russian team this year, Team Spirit.
So there were a number of scandals because of fascist and racist comments directed towards Russian players. One person called them third world dogs, and the other player said he wished Hitler had killed all the Jews. So, an organization that set up the tournament promised to publish a code of ethics for the players. So we've discussed cyber sports, and with this I want to give the floor to Artemy Kozlov, who promised to tell us about League of Legends. It's more or less like Dota, but different. I have a presentation, I remember. Could you show my presentation on the screen?
О, есть слайды. Да.
Great, I see my presentation. So I wanted to take the case of the League of Legends and look at a number of incidents which I think are very demonstrative. And like the previous speaker said, games are very good training tool and also a good field of research to understand the nature of toxicity. I want to take an example of League of Legends. League of Legends is Dota's competitor that Riot Games created. And I want to take this example because I've played the same 4,000 hours in that game, and I'm better familiar with it. I want to start by stressing that there's a gamer community and there's an audience. Some use those terms as similar, but they're not similar. People that play the game are not necessarily a member of the community.
Дело в том, что значительная часть игр, которые сейчас
many of the games that are popular these days
с гигантской аудиторией, несмотря на то, что они ориентированы на игру в команде,
large audience, although they're team games, many of them, people that play together in the same team. They don't have enough time to get to know each other, to become friends, because teams are assigned automatically. So once you log in, you are assigned to a team, and then once the game is over, you will probably never ever meet your team members. But some people stay and become part of the community. So I want to say a few words about interaction within the community and steps that can be taken to deal with toxicity. The way I see it,
не стоит считать как некий рассадник, да, токсичности, как какое-то место, где...
Games should not be considered a breeding ground for toxicity. It's not a place where toxicity originates and then splits out into the great wide open, but it's rather a microcosm, a reflection of all the processes that are happening in our daily life. And if we're able to eradicate hate in video games, this would mean that we've found the way to eradicate hate in real life.
объяснить голосом, что здесь происходит.
Let me explain what's happening on this slide.
Поскольку любая нетерпимость зачастую...
Intolerance of any kind is very often a result of systemic problems. And games
большие системы, но при этом, в отличие от систем, которые питают
are large systems.
наш реальный мир,
But
это
unlike
системы, которые мы можем все-таки охватить.
Systems that exist in real world,
Какие-то маленькие...
games are finite, so we can explore this microcosm. We can
Как эти игры устроены, мы можем много...
analyze it in its entirety. And if we look at how those games
вот эта ненависть...
are structured, we can probably better understand what originates hate,
Например, я выбрал две игры.
hate speech, and toxicity. So I've chosen as example two games that are very different in tone. League of Legends is a game with
Нету жестокости.
beautiful graphics, there's no blood, there's no
Друг друга.
violence, although the two teams are trying to kill each other,
Chivalry,
truth be told, but if we compare them,
с которой справа.
League of Legends with Chivalry, and Chivalry is about Middle Ages, and it's tough, it's violent, it's
Игры престолов на том же уровне.
bloody, it's like the Game of Thrones, maybe even
Токсичнее Chivalry или...
harder. But if you ask the gamers community which one is more toxic, most would say League of Legends,
Это далеко не определяет,
because the game's aesthetic is not at all
ведут себя.
the factor that determines behavior of players. In the League of Legends, games last around 30 minutes. So during those 30-35 minutes,
Большая группа команды, всего по 5
you're there with small teams of 5 people only, and you cannot just leave the game.
соревновательности.
Because League of Legends is very much about competition, about one game fighting, about one team fighting till the end. And that creates a lot of pressure for all participants. And at the same time, in Chivalry, teams are larger, it's 32 people. So it's really difficult to shift responsibility. And any player
Статистической партии перейти в другую команду, если,
can
например,
change teams.
ему неинтересно, либо
If he's not interested in playing for this team, or if his team is losing, and you can quit a game, or you can join another game. So there's no pressure at all.
в League of Legends люди обычно приходят,
Well,
говорят в игровом сообществе, попотеть.
when people come to play League of Legends, they go there, you know,
Вот. И,
to toil, to sweat, to overcome. While Chivalry is about having fun and enjoying.
потому что
So you cannot
спортивная дисциплина,
quit
это игра про соревнования, это
the game in action in the League of Legends, because it is very much about competition. So the developers are trying to find ways
сражаться.
to deal with toxicity. Next slide, please.
В частности, есть два очень интересных
There
доклада.
are two very interesting reports produced by developers. One dates back to 2013 and the other to 2018.
На самом деле, одни из немногих, кто вообще активно делится
Riot
результатами.
is one of the few developers that
Оба этих
publishes
в подробностях, как они устроены, о чем они
overview of measures they take to counter toxicity.
смотреть их, либо там
I strongly recommend, if you're interested in the subject, to download those presentations, 40-minute long to an hour long, which I find very interesting.
5 лет. Соответственно,
Those two presentations were made 5 years from each other. So in the first case, they're saying, back in 2013, they were saying that they were using fines
токсичность, то есть
to counter toxicity. If someone misbehaves, he will be expelled from a game, or banned 3 days, 4 days, months, 6 months, or banned for life.
Соответственно, как это вообще влияло на
And they've analyzed how that impacted different indicators, such as, swear words, etc. But 5 years later, we see that the focus has shifted. And it's not so much about punishing misbehavior, but rather encouraging acceptable behavior, proper behavior.
награждать людей
So they were
достойные ролевые модели. И
awarding people
распространенная на самом деле сейчас позиция, что
that were acting as role models.
поведение работает лучше, чем наказание.
And we've seen recently that promoting positive behavior is more efficient than punishing for inappropriate behavior. I've singled out
Как можно в контексте
4 ways
систем вот этих вот
which I think are efficient when working with finite systems.
охватчики стараются
4 ways that developers use to encourage
его уже
positive behavior. I've spoken about moderation.
закрепление
So it's bans and punishments, but there are also positive stimulus,
идеально отыграл игру.
awarding players for good behaviors. But there's one issue with moderation. Very often, it's done manually.
Была история, когда они лет 8
There
назад
was an incident with Riot where 8 years ago,
это
they
называлось,
were creating tribunals where
видимо, отдавал
players were allowed to make judgments and rulings in case of conflict.
поддержки.
So companies don't do that any longer. They assign this function to volunteers or to customer service, and many companies are starting to use machine learning methods and algorithms.
Других решений
But
возвращаемся.
unlike other decisions, and this brings us back to reasons of toxicity,
Они вне.
and root causes of toxicity
И вот эта конкретная ситуация, это скорее просто
are systemic problems. So moderation is about dealing with symptoms, not with root causes. So which brings us to the second option.
здесь два примера
On the second slide, we see examples from 2 video games.
совершенно иным путем. Соответственно, слева это Death Stranding, довольно нашумевший.
On the left is Death Stranding.
Главный дизайнер, автор, идеолог даже приезжал года 3 назад в Россию.
An ideologist and designer of this game 3 years ago came to Russia and he made a public speech in the Garage Museum.
Представлять группу
So you're a delivery guy. You deliver
достаточно
goods from A to B. You go through rough terrain,
успешно добираться.
and to be able to make it from A to B,
Разного рода
you use different devices, vehicles. Sometimes you have to build roads, you have to build shelters,
и прочее. Но есть нюанс.
you build stairs, but everything you leave behind.
И это единственный способ, как игроки могут друг с другом взаимодействовать. Они могут увидеть.
Will then emerge in other games played by other people. So
Это ведет
people see artifacts
к приятному взаимодействию.
and they have a chance to thank
И справа примерно
another gamer who left this artifact for them. And on the right is a great game called Journey. It's really small. You can
ну, про такое паломничество.
do that in 2-3 hours. So it's a pilgrimage. It's again going from A to B. You overcome obstacles of different kinds.
В эту же игру
But
играет кто-то другой.
if somebody else is playing this game at the same time as you,
Продолжить это путешествие.
you can meet this person and
Опять же, можете достаточно ограниченными
do
средствами,
this journey together. You don't have
разным светом, но по большому счету
many ways to communicate. You can make sounds, you can change the color
коммуникацию и
of
вместе.
your character, but that is enough for interaction. Very enjoyable. You cannot make all games peaceful and joyful. There are competitive games, hard-nosed games,
Уже немного другой.
where the approach is different.
Мы,
If in the second case I spoke about,
то в третьем мы
we
говорим,
decided we could change rules of the game, the third way would be to change
целиком убирают вообще из игры возможность общаться.
approaches to communication. Hearthstone decided to get rid of the chat.
Сколько точно, заготовленных реплик, типа «хорошо
You were allowed a choice of 5 to 8, I'm not sure,
что, ну,
quotes you can use, well played, etc. So even if you're very unhappy about another player, you have a selection of 6 fixed phrases, and you can't hurt much with those.
Apex Legends.
Another example is Apex Legends, where the developers decided to use a very complicated system. It's again preset phrases, but more of them, depending, and they're linked to different contexts. So you can point at something and say, there is something useful, or I saw something dangerous there. And that limits the use of voice chat, and people often argue over voice chats. And also when you interact during the game, you only talk about the game. Those approaches clearly are limiting a player's ability to communicate. Well, if it's an online game, we want players to be able to interact and have meaningful conversations, not just argue, but make friends, because many of us found great friends online. And then there's this fourth option, to focus on the community. I stressed in the beginning that gamers do not equal community, but people that play the game, that some of them eventually become part of the community. And a community is a place that creates its culture of interaction and communication. It creates certain rules, certain culture, and you can influence this culture. When you start playing League of Legends, you're requested to accept rules of the community, and you will be shown certain values of the community. There's another approach. There are role models in every community that can show examples of appropriate or inappropriate behavior. Those could be influencers on YouTube or streamers. And I like the example of old online games, where you were assigned to play in a team with people you've never met. In the world of Warcraft and other games, there are servers that can accommodate a limited number of gamers, and they're different. For instance, there's a character server where you're expected to act as a certain character. If you don't, people that use this server will act as moderators and expel people that don't fit, or will explain to them rules of behavior. I think it's a good system. That has unfortunately been neglected, but I think there's a lot we can learn in terms of how we could create good non-toxic culture in online communities. And that was my last slide.
Надеюсь, у вас этот QR-код сработает, на еще одно видео о токсичности в видеоиграх с позиции игрока.
There's another link.
Более глубоко копнуть.
Yes, on my very last slide about toxicity in games from the gamer's point of view. So if you're interested, I do encourage you to download this video and watch it. We will leave time for Q&A. I'm keeping track of the time. So note your question. Don't forget it. You'll get a chance to ask it. Thank you for this amazing overview of video games. Again, we mentioned the League of Legends. And I see in my notes
GDC Game Developers Conference and
mention of Game Developers Conference. It's the largest gamers conference in the Western world. It happens annually, and Jeff Lynne spoke recently, and he is the creator of the social media of the League of Legends, and he showed statistics, moderation data. They were moderating toxicity or deleting messages from the chat. When something happens in the chat, they deleted chat, and that reduced the number of toxicity by 32.7%. But people remained active, they kept talking, so moderation actually works. And they also used the tribunal portal, where they would publish records of registered users from the chat and show those records to the community, and then the community would vote whether a player was toxic or not.
И устранили токсичность у почти 300 тысяч игроков.
150 million people voted, and 300,000 players were found toxic and eliminated.
Издатель игры Dota 2
Valve, who is a publisher of Dota 2, created filters
помогает отфильтровать до
that allow to filter up to 75
помощью искусственного интеллекта
negative words and phrases. Artificial intelligence identifies negative
а там какое-нибудь другое слово.
phrases or swear words and substitute them with other words. Twitch does not allow users to create accounts that create offensive terms and filters chat. Blizzard changes offensive words in their chat for something
создание оскорбительных никнеймов. Они же блокируют
less offensive.
чат перманентно или временно.
And also they block ability to write in the chat permanently or constantly in the world of tank, and you can be banned from the chat in individual cases. And with this, I want to give the floor to Andre.
I'm just going to ask a quick favour first. If I can go live, if I can pass my phone. Can I? Here you go. Thank you. It's live, it's going. Okay, thank you. There are a lot of things I would like to comment on which have just been said, but I will perhaps start with what I've prepared. If we can go to the next slide. Okay, so I want to start by taking a step back and considering the problem we're looking at from a number of different angles. And what I want to talk about is different to what we've heard before. Ultimately, I believe the problem is that we are too dismissive of online games, just as we were once too dismissive of social media. This is a mistake that we must not make again. Just as social media has fueled hate and even incitement to genocide, as we saw in Myanmar, online games can also serve as a platform for serious harm. But my message is not that games are bad. My message is that we need to respond to two separate problems. The first is game development that is intended to cause harm. Things that look like games but are designed to spread harmful ideology. The second is game platforms that lack sufficient controls to prevent the technology being misused as a tool for harm. There is also a third category where the harm is unintentional, but the platform itself is somehow contributing. So let's consider some of these problems. The first one, which you can see in the slide, is looking at games of hate. I have gone back to a very early game from the 1990s, literally 1990. In Germany, there was a rise of games glorifying Nazism and promoting Nazi ideology. Kzed Manager was a resource management game released in 1990. KZ is a German abbreviation for a concentration camp. Players had to sell labour, gold fillings and lampshades in order to build gas chambers and purchase gas. In 1991, a poll of students in Austria found that 40% of them knew of this game and 20% had seen it. This is one of hundreds of underground pro-Nazi games that were circulating in Europe around 1990. Let's go to the next slide, please. games of extremism. This one is from just 5 years later. This game, The Story of Chumachenko Village, was released in 1995, shortly after the sarin gas attack on the Tokyo subway. This was an attack that killed 14 people. It used video footage from the attack. There were pictures of people who died. There was also material directly out of recruitment videos from the group behind the attack. It was thought that the game was produced by the Doomsday cult that carried out the attack. This was later proven to be untrue. It was produced to mock the cult by a couple of students. But still, it was sharing propaganda for extremism. All of the video footage they used had been broadcast by mainstream media. After the attack, there was a lot of media coverage, and they just used this in the game. Let's go to the next slide. Now, a different problem. Games that lack sensible restraint. What you can see is Pokemon Go. From 2016, it was an international sensation. It used augmented reality. Pokemon were appearing all over the world. This included the poison gas Pokemon, which appeared at Auschwitz and the US Holocaust Memorial Museum. The issue is deeper than it looks, because the data they used to generate where things would appear actually came from an earlier game from the same company, which was a division of Google at the time. That game was called Ingress. Complaints about Ingress disrespecting sensitive sites had previously led to Google apologising. They apologised, they made corrections, yet when they rolled out Pokemon Go, all of the problematic data came back in the new game. This was not just, it was a mistake, but it was not a mistake that they should have been unaware of. It was something they had notice of, that they knew, but still this mistake occurred again. This is due to a lack of attention from the company, a lack of sensitivity. Next slide, please. Then we have abusive games. So Roblox is a game and platform where users create and interact with a 3D world. More than 40 million people use it each day. Half of them are under 13 years old. Since 2018, there have been reports of it being abused to promote anti-Semitism, racism, Nazism, Islamic extremism, misogyny, and more. In some user-generated games on Roblox, users act out race-hate murders or carry out virtual terrorism. Then we have games and a link to terrorism. In 2019, there were a number of terrorist attacks linked to the online community poll, including attacks on 2 mosques in Christchurch in New Zealand, a synagogue in Poway in the United States, another in a synagogue in Halle in Germany. I want to focus on the attack in Germany. In Halle, the attacker broadcast their actions live using Twitch, which was mentioned before. Twitch is a platform focused on live streaming gaming. In the Poway attack, a response to the post by the attacker announced announcing the imminent attack read, "Based, get a high score." This is a gaming reference, but referring to an imminent attack to kill real people. Gaming culture in this context was encouraging someone to continue with their terrorist attack and kill more people. But if I go back to the previous attack with Twitch, we saw technology that was not built for terrorist attacks, was not even built for general social media. It was built for gaming. And it was misappropriated and misused for the purpose of supporting this terrorist attack. And there was a delay in dealing with it because a company dealing with games didn't have the same processes in place as companies dealing with social media or other platforms, because their view was they do games. So there is a risk if we don't look at the full capabilities of the technology and how they might be abused. Next slide, please. So I have a few slides here that I want to share related to Steam, which is an online community for gaming. Yep. So Steam allows users to buy, play, create, and discuss over 300 online games. What you see, the image, this is from Friday. At the time I looked, there were almost 22 million users logged in at that time, and 5.5 million at the time I looked were currently in a game. This is a big community. Let's go to the next slide. They may be a little small, the images, but I did a search for usernames that refer to Jew. Some of them were accounts from Jews, from Israelis, but there were also many that were deeply problematic. This slide shows the anti-Semitic meme of the Jew, and my organisation has a whole report on where this image came from. But here is a whole lot of accounts, all with the same profile picture. All this data is from Friday just past. This is current. This is there right now. Let's go to the next slide. Here are other accounts with anti-Semitic usernames. We see usernames including Filthy Jew. We see names I have on this slide and the next one: Jew Killer, Zero Jew, Gas the Jew, Greedy Jew, Hook-Nosed Jew, Evil Jew, Kill the Jews, Jews Kill Jesus, Kill All Jews, I Kill Jews for Fun, I Hate Jews, I Want to Kill Them. Let's go to the next slide. Here's some more of them. I did not make more slides of this because I got tired of reading it, not because there were not more for me to find and share with you. This is available. So the question I want to ask is, would we accept a platform like Facebook or Amazon hosting users with names and pictures like the ones I've just shown you? I think the answer in social media is clearly no. Yet in this gaming platform, this very large gaming platform, with users who are going into many different games, we have this. So the comment was made before about the difference between the players and the community. This is not the game, this is the community. And this is a community with a problem. You look like you have a comment.
I think we can discuss this later.
Okay,
because this is a very
good.
Interesting topic. Yeah.
Okay, good. Let's go to the next slide. We will come back to discuss more. Yes. So one last slide on this. Just to show you again, on Steam, There is a community here. We have an image of a group that is a dedicated hate group. I only have one example of this that I found by accident as I was looking. But the point is, there are user accounts that are problems, there are users that are spreading racism, and then there are groups and spaces dedicated to hate that are on the gaming platform in the community. Next slide, please. I want to focus on the future briefly now. And unfortunately, this is not a positive view. Facebook, as of very recently, is now known as Meta. The Facebook company, with their many different platforms, has been renamed. As Mark Zuckerberg explained just last month, this is more than just a brand name change. I will quote from Mark Zuckerberg here. "The next platform will be even more immersive. An embodied internet where you're in the experience, not just looking at it. We call this the metaverse, and it will touch every product we build. The defining quality of the metaverse will be a feeling of presence, like you are right there with another person or in another place." End quote. Virtual worlds have existed for years. This includes Second Life from 2003, IMVU from 2004, Roblox that we mentioned before from 2006. Meta won't be joining them. Meta is not a game. It is looking at bringing most of the world's population, which are on Facebook platforms, bringing them with in this change to embed people in a virtual reality, a virtual space. So this will become the new reality, which means separating that it is just a game becomes much more difficult. Let's go last slide. So the question is, who sets the standard when you're interacting in real time in a virtual space? Real-time efforts to tackle xenophobia and hate are far more difficult than processing content that is uploaded and viewed over time by other people. Our first speaker already mentioned looking at the text data, right? But most of it is audio. It is much easier to process the text than to process the audio. When we move to virtual environments where we have virtual interactions with streaming audio text all in real time on a scale of hundreds of millions, perhaps billions of people, how do we deal with this challenge? The next question then is what law will apply if having different rules for different people might break the environment? It's one thing to limit content that you can't see a post in a country, let's say a Nazi swastika, you can't see it in Germany if you're in Germany looking at the platform. What do you do when two people are talking in real time? Whose law applies? Is it possible to have virtual spaces designated as belonging to a real country? Does this even make sense? Are we about to start the entire saga that we have faced in social media all over again? What can we learn from the successes and failures in both online gaming and in social media as the two merge together? I thank you.
Thank you very much, Andre. Я думала, что 1,5 часа это много.
I believe that 1.5 hours. I thought that 1.5 hours was too little, but now I understand that it is very little to discuss such a topics. Thank you very much for your different point of view, and I believe that all of us present here will agree that games are a reflection of the real world, of its moods, of its social structure, and surely games as a subculture have their own peculiar features and reflect also the moods of the society, the current trends. And definitely the issue of attention to xenophobia manifestations and toxicity in games is a very important issue. By the way, the swastika is forbidden in very many countries in the games. If it exists anywhere, it violates the laws of nearly all the countries. And also, through games, you can teach, for example, tolerance. There is one of the areas of the work in our country is useful games. We make free games for preschool kids, preschool-age kids throughout Russia. They are not exactly educational, but they're useful. So we test them, have neuropsychologists test them. We give some useful, beneficial mechanics, and we explain what they're good for. For example, tolerability is one of the things that children can be taught, for example, by way of games. Now I would like to pass on the word to Amber. Amber, I hope you are with us. Could we have our online speaker on the screen, please? Thank you very much. And this will give us some time for questions. Amber, please.
Of course. Hi, thank you. I hope you can hear me well. Thank you for having me. I found all the speeches so far very interesting and very informative as well. So I'm going to be speaking about anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial in online games. And when we talk about anti-Semitism, it's important to remember that anti-Semitic hate and other extremist hate is very prevalent across various spaces. So this is not something that is, new to online games. However, it's important to note that recently online giants such as Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube have made attempts at clamping down on such content. Although the deplatforming of these extremist actors and hateful content has a largely positive impact, one aspect that we all need to consider is that many then move to smaller or more niche platforms, including online games, to spread their hate. So when we talk about anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial in online games, there are three main aspects to consider. First of all, players or the community of online games that spread anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial. We saw several examples in Andrei's speech. Second of all, games which are created with the intention of distorting or glorifying the Holocaust or spreading hate. And third, games which are misused, different to their intended way, to spread anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial or other forms of hatred. Regards to point one I mentioned, according to a report from earlier this year, I think it came out in September, at least 22% of Jewish players of online games have faced harassment during gameplay. The hatred spread in these instances can be varied, ranging from anti-Semitic hate campaigns targeting specific players to generic anti-Semitic verbal abuse during gameplay. And here I'd like to add something anecdotal as well, relates to the 22% of Jewish players. We will be speaking about the normalization that happens as well later in my talk. But what I would like to mention is this 22%. I recently spoke to a young person playing an online game, and I noted anti-Semitic comments being made during this person's gameplay. Which when I then commented to him, talking about, how do you feel with this anti-Semitic comments, said, oh no, this doesn't affect me. I'm not being harassed. This is just normal. And I think that this is something that is very, very problematic when we see people who are being targeted by hate themselves, not even noticing that they are being affected by it because it's almost considered normal. This is very scary. Players or people, parts of the community, as mentioned earlier, often hide behind this relative anonymity and facelessness of online games, use hateful language, and then attack users who are either Jewish or perceived as Jewish. And what's also interesting about this is that the anti-Semitic hate in online games can be directed in a two-way manner. So it can either originate from those who create content, who spread hateful vitriol, but it can also originate from the audiences that then target specific users or streamers, as mentioned earlier, with anti-Semitism. And additionally, players sometimes use this hateful language to insult one another during gameplay. Going to the second point I mentioned, games that are whose aim is to spread hate. Approximately a year ago, members of the German alt-right created an anti-Semitic, homophobic, sexist, and xenophobic computer game called Heimatdefender, or Homeland Defender, in which players must defeat Jewish-coded villains to protect themselves from a global conspiracy. According to the creators, the game was downloaded more than 20,000 times in the first days following its release. Linda Schlegel, an expert on extremism at the Goethe University, describes it as problematic because it's not an immediate, obvious display of ideology. It's a fun, free of charge, cool-looking retro game, but it can draw people in and be a potential first step in engaging. And this is something that's really important to see, is how gaming is misused to aid radicalization. There's also a strong influence of toxic masculinity in video and online games, in which weapons are portrayed as the solution to all problems. As we can also see, and as we've heard, video game culture can have an effect in real-life violent attacks. In 2019, both the attackers in the Yom Kippur attack in Halle mentioned and the attack on the mosques in Christchurch in March relied on video game perspectives to live stream their actions. The Christchurch attacker even made a direct reference of this gamification, beginning his attack with the words, "Let's play," before murdering 51 worshippers. A short while after the attack, a video game glorifying the attack and allowing people to play as the attacker was created and later banned by the New Zealand government. And this is also where we can see the perversion of seemingly harmless computer games that come into play. Players of innocent games such as Minecraft and Roblox distort the games into anti-Semitic and Holocaust denial content. And we are often too late in considering how tools can be misused by those that spread hate. But exactly these people are extremely adept at managing exactly such misuse. They come up with very creative ideas sometimes to spread hate and anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial. In Minecraft, a game in which users can build worlds for gameplay, users recreated Holocaust-themed areas such as concentration camps. And often videos of this content are then cross-shared on a variety of platforms, including TikTok and Instagram, creating even larger audience for this hate. In 2020, a video of such a recreation, underlaid with a song about children going to Auschwitz, went viral on TikTok and was later recreated and reposted several times. On Roblox, a user created a driving game in which he urged players to become racist and run over people with their car. Problem, in my opinion, is not that games themselves cause people to be more violent. This has been disproved quite a few times. However, far more dangerous is the fact that online games and gaming spaces provide a safe haven and communal gathering spaces for individuals that are hateful and violent, normalizing their behavior and encouraging others to join. This culture also spreads to other areas of the internet, becoming pervasive on platforms such as Reddit, 4chan, 8chan, etc., where it is often recycled into even more radical content. In this culture, hate is often disguised as jokes. Researchers have shown that including extremist narratives among everyday conversations can be a pathway to radicalization. And this has also been used by those that spread this kind of hate. We've also seen, for example, in the US, Steve Bannon identified gamers as a natural audience for alt-right thought, stating, and I quote, "You can activate that army. They come in through Gamergate or whatever, and then get turned on to politics." End quote. Earlier, I mentioned the importance of moderation on large social media platforms. And this was also mentioned by Andre before me. As hateful content is marginalized on such major platforms, it looks for niche and unmoderated areas in which the spread can then become normalized. We regularly see that platforms without moderation, hateful content becomes the primary objective because users that do not feel comfortable being exposed to such language and imagery are often pushed out, while others attempt to one-up each other in creating more and more provocative content. The results in normalization and acceptance of forms of hate ranging from violence against women, threats of rape, Holocaust denial, jokes about the Holocaust, threats of gassing the Jews, etc. Those exposed to such content also become desensitized to these topics as so-called shock value gets lost. Platform providers therefore need to more strongly moderate the content allowed to avoid becoming hotbeds of hate and ensure that users can be and feel safe and secure on their platforms. By refusing to allow the congregation of hateful players on such platforms, we can counteract the hate permeating our society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amber. Спасибо большое.
Thank you so much, Amber.
За другой взгляд.
Thank you for giving us this new perspective. From what I understand,
разделился на две половины. Я уверена, что у нас очень
we have some sort of a divide
в том, что мы говорим.
around this table. I understand we agree on basic concepts, but it feels like we're on two different sides. With gamers on one side and representatives of the industry on the other side.
Представители, которые говорят о том, что в social media и в играх очень много.
And some say that there's so much going on social media. I think we're all right in different ways, but we don't have much time. We only have we have half an hour or so. Less. But I want to leave a little time for the Q&A because we have questions from the audience. I saw Artemi taking notes, so I expect you want to comment. Indeed, I have a few ideas on how to merge the two perspectives, bring them closer. Because, as has been rightly mentioned, people that play games
английское слово прозвучало desensitized, то есть
become desensitized, so they get used to that, and they
замечание, потому что, возможно, действительно многие из нас
think that what's happening is normal, and this is a very valid statement because we're really getting used to that, and we take it as normal, we take it as a given, which it is not. And there are many things to keep in mind. We spoke about games, but also we mentioned Facebook, TikTok, and other social media.
Многие из этих проблем, которые мы сейчас...
And many of the problems we have been discussing are typical, not just for video games, but for the internet culture in general. Take the case of
разного рода offensive имен и аватарок.
Offensive names and avatars.
Потому что
I find that very interesting because there are very many people online.
Не воспринимают, ну то есть со стороны это может выглядеть как какой-то вот прям такой оголтелый хейт, но на самом деле они это как бы...
That don't perceive that as hate. You might think it's hate.
For lulz, короче, ну типа прикольно.
But they just find it funny.
Термин
I did it for lols.
вещи обзывают, что фактически...
And sometimes they, you know, act as if it's some sort of irony. But it's really difficult to tell on the web where irony ends and hate begins. So people that are not part of the culture, they don't understand that this is an irony or post-irony. They might take it for face value. And moderation, I think, is instrumental. I think moderation is very important. At this moment, going back to community and audience,
какое-то огромное разобщенное количество людей, которые
As a large group of people that generate content, that leave their trace online with their messages, with their comments.
история с
And we've seen, with the example of Cambridge Analytica and others,
не подозревать, что он существует, просто потому что алгоритм
we are unaware of a lot of content, but the algorithms are not showing it to us. So those people are out there. But it is very likely that we've never seen those people, who have never encountered that content. And this is the big difference between the audience and the community. So we don't know if those people are aware of each other. They just exist somewhere in the great wide open. And colleagues mentioned safe havens, hotbeds of hate. And this is a genuine problem we need to counter, that deserves our attention. And people have been dealing with it for many years, especially after Cambridge Analytica case. But if you look at such platforms as Steam, why didn't it? I mean, why don't they do the same? They should. I think we need to ask all sorts of studios such as Valve those questions. I mean, do you have such tools? Do you have moderation? Do you have control tools? Maybe you should put them in place. And once those questions are asked, maybe they will start working on it. We need to hold them accountable for what's happening on their platforms, but oftentimes they're unaware that something bad is happening until someone points it out to them, because they have to deal with large volumes of big data. So this is what we need to research. This is what we need to focus on. And this is what I stressed in my presentation. Games are microcosms, are little universes. And they work according to the same laws as our larger universe. And it's important to ask questions that we are discussing right now, because only once we've talked about it, once we've discussed it, something will start happening. If I were doing research in psychology and social sciences, I would very much be interested in data that those game companies are collecting, because they've so much data we can process and get very interesting and informative results. And I hope this will give interesting idea to some. I feel Andrei wants to add. I just sense his urge. But before that, let me make a brief comment. We mentioned Meta Universe. It's not a game. Indeed.
Конечно же, и в нее, так же как и в интернет, перенесем весь багаж из реального мира. Поэтому проблема эта актуальна.
When we enter Meta Universe, we'll take with us all, you know,
И, соответственно, как и с любой проблемой, бороться с
we've accumulated in the past and the real world.
Первое, запрет.
So,
Здесь, я считаю,
what we can do to deal with problems, we can use bans. This is one thing.
в том числе
Or coercive measures, and it's important for the Jewish community and all of us to highlight problems to publishers, to game developers.
Появление экстремистских игр на платформе Steam можно легко сделать с помощью даже искусственного интеллекта.
Because you can use artificial intelligence algorithms to prevent hate games from appearing on Steam and other platforms. You can moderate hate speech, you can moderate chats. That just requires a little bit of attention. That just requires somebody's giving attention to it. So you can either ban and use coercive measures through technologies, etc., or another option, you can educate people, because games don't just, appear. They're people that create games, web designers. So if there's inappropriate content in a game, that means someone has created it. It just does not come from out of nowhere. And a company is not always aware that it is there. Maybe it is not allowed, but it just, appeared, and that means that someone made it. So education is important, and you need to educate the community. You need to educate children using various channels. Over to you, Andrei.
Thank you. I had a small comment. Now I have more comments. What I wanted to say firstly is that the idea that there is too much data, we heard this before, many years ago. We heard this from Facebook. We heard this from YouTube. How can we possibly deal with anti-Semitism, xenophobia, racism? Look how many videos are uploaded every hour. This is not a good response. These are not small startup companies. These are very rich companies with many engineers, with many resources. The question is how much of the resource is spent on responding to these problems. This is the question. And it's either there are more resources because the company wants to do this and wants to clean up the environment, or because governments are pressuring them to do it, and if they don't do it, they will get fined. This is a positive or a negative pressure. But for many, many years, there has been no pressure. And as long as there is no pressure and no movement, then the response is we can sit back and it's fine. A comment that was made just before about it influencing the real world. 2008, I spoke in my first talk to a large audience on the topic of online hate, was at the Global Forum for Combating Anti-Semitism in Jerusalem. I was on a plenary panel and I introduced the concept of anti-Semitism 2.0. And I said anti-Semitism 2.0 is the creation of acceptability for anti-Semitism in the community online. And once this happens online, it will create acceptability offline as well. And over many years now, this has proven to be the case. And this is what we've seen. It's become the reality. So the situation with the games is the same as the situation with the social media in this. This is the risk. This is why it must be addressed. But it comes back to two questions. The one question is the money and the resources, which must come from the industry to invest in fixing this problem. But there is a second problem, which is access to the engineers. In my IEEE role, we ran a large forum on social media and societal harm just a month or two ago. And we had leading speakers from the UN, from TikTok, from academics across the board. The reason we did this is that in 2021 alone, the number of academic papers looking at hate speech in a digital context, 50% of everything on this topic that has ever been published in peer-reviewed journals was published this year so far. And the same was true last year. The volume of interest is growing at an extreme pace. But what we need to do is stop having just the policy people, the lawyers, come to conferences like this usually. We need to have the dialogue with the engineers. And this goes to what you said, the people that build the games actually have a code of ethics that they must be preventing these sorts of problems. But many of the companies see one part of the company dealing with these issues and a different part of the company dealing with the building, with the technology. The IEEE Computer Society is looking at putting together a new task force to bring together engineers and scientists, academics, but also the engineers from industry to start addressing these sorts of issues. So I will put that message out to my colleagues and to anyone else that is a computer scientist, software developer, software engineer. We are looking to bring these people together and we are the right platform to do it. The IEEE is the largest professional body. So if we can do this, maybe we start seeing change.
Absolutely. У нас есть вопросы из зала и...
Now we have a question from the audience, and we have got just a little time left. And we would like to hear, or if there are more questions, you are welcome to ask them. Please use the microphone for the sake of translation.
Спасибо.
Thank you. I am a teacher from school number 42, or Gershel Samara. I am not a gaming kind of person, actually, but as I work at school, it is very interesting for me, so I came to listen to this, and I heard a lot of interesting information. And I wanted to ask my question after Artemi, because it looked so very positive. But I hear a lot, as I said, I don't play games, but I keep hearing Dota, Autocomp, etc. I heard many times we are a Jewish school. A Jewish school as part of a regular Russian school. I heard more than once that such phrases as Jew, dirty Jew, filthy Jew, it's a common way to work each other. But among 13 to 15-year-old kids, it's, I would say it is quite common. That's one thing. Maybe about the games themselves, about their contents. And I heard from Andrei lots of interesting information, because I feel I care a lot about it. And I heard at Channel 9 of the Israeli TV that there will, many of you might have heard it, to Steam platform, they will download a game developed by a Brazilian guy of Palestinian origin called the Knights of Al-Aqsa Mosque. And the idea of the game will be that a Palestinian will have to kill Sahal soldiers. And my daughter is in the military in the Iron Dome in Sahal. So I got very concerned about this. And the Ministry of Justice seems to have approved this game. So that's what I wanted to say. Also, I, as a teacher, would be very much interested to see, this is what I heard. There are games which are aimed at forming tolerance. You mentioned this. We would like to have such games at school. And I believe it's very important. Because I don't know how willing the kids will be to play it, but it would be good to have these games at school. And my final question, which I really wanted to ask as a question more than a comment, is one thing, games with xenophobic or anti-Semitic content. The other thing is that I read more than once that online games can somehow attract or involve children in extremist organizations, can recruit organizations. So how about recruiting young people to extremist organizations? Yes, I will try to cover everything you said. I'm afraid I have not heard about this, the story about the game with killing soldiers, so I cannot comment about this, make any comments. And first of all, about calling each other names and about games in private world. There can be one big answer. Games, as any other media for communication, is a kind of traffic. So you can recruit by books, by leaflets, by some rhymes, etc. Jan Pogost, a researcher, has a book called Persuasive Games. I'm not sure what the Russian translation is, who studies the issue of game as a way of persuasion. It's rather complex, but it is quite interesting to know. So there is quite a potential. But I don't know if these games are used more actively than, for example, cinema, the movies, or other social media. That's another issue. I think it's probably quite equal. The question about the behavior of kids during games, what do they call each other? This is a question more to parents
Они могут и в детском саду друг друга обозвать.
They can call each other rude names in kindergarten and preschool, in a sandbox, anywhere. And
Тот факт,
the difficult thing is that games enable to involve not only people from your own yard, but people who live at the other end of the country. But this is also an issue of where that the parents should regulate where you let your kids go and where you don't. And thirdly, games about tolerance. We touched upon.
то есть было много примеров игр про...
There were many examples of games about evil, about killing, all that stuff. But really there are huge communities of game developers and people who produce games which touch upon these problems from the point of view of how can we make it better, how can we improve it. For example,
Есть очень большая, например, очень гигантская просто...
There's a huge LGBT community that makes games that tell about how you can cope with your feelings or how you can work with all this stuff, how to approach other people or how to accept yourself when you have thoughts or doubts or whatever. The important thing is to pay attention to them, to write about them. So everything that we have touched upon, it's all about paying attention to this, about knowing that it exists. We speak about games, and until now we thought, oh, they're just games, they're kids having fun. But there's a huge area of things that we haven't thought about. Like 5 years ago, social media, we did not think much about them. All these are issues that require comprehensive research, study about how this media works and what kind of events happen there, what kind of notions arise. Because like any other media, it can be used both for the benefit and both to harm. Also to harm. Yeah. I don't think anything could have been better as a final speech for this. We are running out of time, but we have just time for one more another comment from Andrea.
In response to what can we do with the students with games of tolerance, we had a quick discussion up here amongst the three of us, and we're all in agreement. One very positive thing you can do is empower the students. It is easy to make games these days. There are platforms where you can generate it. Give the students the task of designing and creating a game to promote tolerance. And this is the best way to engage them.
Перевести? Нет. Мне нужно переводить. Вы услышали, да?
You heard my answer. You have the translation, right? Good. Thank you very much. And we have time for one more question, and then we need to round up. Do you believe it is possible to use hate speeches for psychological oppression in competitive games? Maybe at certain servers where hate is available, where it is not available. And is it possible in games, or you should not do it?
This may be the translation. Is it possible? Yes, it's very possible. It happens. But I think the question is, should it be allowed? Yes. And I think the answer to this is no. And it's the same, should it be allowed in politics? If you can use racism to win an election, should this be allowed? The answer must be no. Racism is a very powerful tool to persuade people, but it's a very dangerous tool. Okay, so we must act to make sure that this power doesn't get used in a way that harms society. But games are not special in this respect. It's about any use of racism in any context.
Это тоже замечательные слова. Мы заканчиваем.
These are also wonderful words. We need to finish. Not yet? Well, I just wanted to say that, yes, I agree. There's one thing I have doubts about, is that is it appropriate or not? Or can it be avoided? Any place where people can communicate, there will be people from different social strata, from different families, with different upbringing, with different background, and they will communicate at the level at which they have been taught to, at which they can. So, is it appropriate or not? It would be great if everybody had an opportunity to have a good level of education, psychological correction, adjustment, or development. Thank you. Thank you very much. I believe we have made a little step forward to make the world better, the world of games too. Thank you very much to all of you who participated in this.